There was a man who went down the street in one of the cities in Mexico. He was a father looking for his daughter who hadn't come home for a few days. The man was Seen Beckwith, and his missing daughter was Leek Beckwith. Seen went to an impound car lot in the city of Juarez. He saw his daughter's car there. Then he opened and checked the contents of the car. But he only found glasses. Seen thought that his daughter was kidnapped. Seen was increasingly convinced that his daughter was kidnapped in Juarez. Then Seen met the police and took him to where Seen's daughter's car was. Unfortunately, the car was no longer there. The police thought that Seen gave a wrong report. The police even thought that Seen's daughter was kidnapped by her friend. Hearing that, Seen felt upset. Then Seen decided to go home without any results. Seen lived on the border between Mexico and America. It seemed that he was a rancher because his house had a large area of land, but it turned out that he was not an ordinary person, but a retired soldier. When he arrived home, Seen calmed his wife named Susan. Seen also calmed his youngest daughter, Lauren, but Lauren seemed disappointed with Seen, who didn't find her older sister. Then Susan asked about the opinion of the police, but Seen believed that the police were also involved in Leek's kidnapping. The next day, Seen's friend came to his house. His name was Max, who was a former military special soldier. Other than Max, it turned out that Seen was an honored former Special Forces member of the American military. After that, Seen and Max sat on the terrace and thought about how to find Leek and her friend. Then Max advised Seen to burn down the city of Juarez instead. But Seen didn't want to use violence in his daughter's search. Moreover, Seen did not know who Leek's kidnapper was. The next morning, Seen decided to go to the American embassy in Mexico with Leek's friend's father. Seen told him about Leek and her friend who had disappeared. Then the American ambassador said that there were many Mexicans who went missing while passing through the city of Juarez. The man said that they were most likely kidnapped by one of the cartels there like everyone else. The man explained that the cartel was not an ordinary cartel, but was like a military with special forces. The cartel named Los Mercenarios, which means mercenaries. They not only sold drugs but also engaged in human trafficking. The ambassador couldn't help Seen to find Leek because this case was related to Los Mercenarios. Hearing that, Seen felt upset and angry. Then Seen decided to leave. When Seen arrived at the lobby, he saw news about the Los Mercenarios cartel who massacred people who obstructed his business. Even worse, the government didn't dare to intervene in the chaos. After seeing the news about the cartel's crimes, Seen and Susan invited reporters to their house. They told them about the kidnapping of their daughter. They did this to bring more attention to the case. News of Leek's disappeared case spread quickly, until the news reached the head of the cartel that Seen was referring to. Hearing that the man named Victor Garza knew that Seen was a former Special Forces officer who would sooner or later attack him. Then Victor ordered his men to find Seen's daughter's kidnapper. Soon Victor and his men met two policemen. It turned out that the policeman was Montoya, who served Seen in Mexico. Apparently, he was the one who kidnapped Leek and the other girls. Montoya did this to reward cartel members. However, he caught the wrong person for arresting Leek. Then Victor ordered his men to shoot the two policemen. But Montoya asked Victor for forgiveness. Montoya asked for one more chance to make up for his mistake. Hearing that, Victor forgave him. Then Victor called his younger brother Carlos. Carlos was a younger brother and subordinate whom Victor trusted. Victor told Carlos to kill Seen and his family members. Victor wanted to warn people that Victor's organization was not an ordinary organization. The next day, Seen fed his horse, but from a distance, Seen saw a forest dog. Seen thought that if the dog came closer, it would disturb his pets. Then he took a rifle to shoot the dog. But just as he was about to shoot the dog, Seen saw several cars approaching his house. It turned out to be Carlos' men. Seeing that, Seen ran to his house and warned Susan and Lauren to hide. Meanwhile, he tried to block Carlos' men. Seeing Seen, who was overwhelmed, made Susan call the police. However, Susan found it difficult to contact the police because Victor's troops carried a signal blocker. Luckily, Susan managed to contact the police. She reported that there were men with weapons in her house. Hearing that, the police rushed to Seen's house. On the other hand, Carlos and his men were getting closer to Seen's house. Scene struggled to shoot at Carlos' men, until finally they surrounded Scene's house. One of his men asked why they didn't just enter Scene's house and kill him. Carlos said that Scene was not an arbitrary person. Carlos meant that Scene was a former member of the American Special Forces who was very skilled, so they must not let their guard down against Scene. Scene provoked Carlos and his men into Scene's house, then one by one began to enter and split up, but they couldn't find Scene, Susan, and Lauren. Knowing that those people entered his house, Scene immediately shot them one by one. Scene was very good at shooting, and he even shot several times just by hearing his enemy's footsteps. Seeing his troops reduced one by one, Carlos felt upset. Finally, he entered Scene's house with all his men and also Montoya. Then they fired at Scene's house. Carlos urged Scene to come out and surrender, but of course, Scene did not obey Carlos' orders. Scene attacked Carlos' men instead. Scene hid, but he was still able to shoot Carlos' men. They began to be worried about Scene. Likewise with Montoya, who was scared and hiding. Seeing that Carlos felt like his men were losers, then he told Montoya to find Scene's whereabouts. Hesitantly and slowly advancing footsteps, Scene suddenly appeared and pointed at Montoya. Simultaneously, the police officer that Susan had contacted earlier arrived at Scene's house. He saw many dead people in front of Scene's house. He was confused about what happened at the house, but one of Carlos' men kept watch in front of Scene's house. He saw the police car coming. Then Carlos told him to kill the policeman. Hearing that, Carlos' men immediately shot the police car brutally. Until the car stopped for a moment, the man thought the policeman was dead. But it turned out that the policeman was still alive and shot Carlos' men. Inside the house, Scene tried to defeat Carlos, but Carlos put a grenade there. Seeing that, Scene immediately left the house through the window. Luckily, Susan and Lauren managed to get out first. Then Carlos and Carlos' men left the house. They then continued the shootout outside. But Scene was no longer alone. The policeman helped Scene by shooting Carlos' men. Soon the policeman died from being shot. Then Scene returned to fight Carlos alone. He realized that his ammunition was running out, so he told Susan to get a car in the garage. Susan picked up Scene, who was hiding. At high speed, they ran away from home. Seeing that Carlos was very angry, he immediately followed Scene from behind. Carlos and his remaining men tried to stop Scene, but it turned out that Scene really stopped. He didn't give up, but shot them brutally. Scene didn't kill Carlos right away. He asked about Leek's whereabouts and requested some additional information about Carlos' headquarters. At first, Carlos didn't want to tell Scene, but Scene continued to torture Carlos until he wanted to talk. Carlos told him the whereabouts of Leek. After getting the information, Scene immediately shot Carlos in the head. Scene told Susan and Lauren to go to a safe place. Meanwhile, Scene went to Victor's headquarters. He told Susan that he would bring Leek home safely. Then Scene immediately contacted Max and invited him to Victor's headquarters. Max gladly accepted Scene's invitation. Max even said that he would bring a complete weapon because he knew for sure his enemies were many. Not long after Max met Scene, he showed the weapons he brought to fight. Then they both rushed to Victor's headquarters. Later that evening, Scene and Max arrived in front of Victor's headquarters. He looked at the situation they were using binoculars. He saw Victor, who was agitated because Carlos was dead. Moreover, Scene killed Carlos. Seeing the calm situation, Scene and Max immediately killed the guards one by one, until they arrived at Victor's headquarters. At first, they easily killed the guards, but then they had to deal with Victor's stronger men, until there was a tense shootout between them. Victor realized the sound of a shootout at his headquarters. Hearing that, Victor immediately asked for help from his colleagues. However, it was difficult to defeat Scene and Max because they were very excited. Soon Scene and Max managed to break into Victor's room. They immediately pointed a gun at Victor, who was terrified. Scene was furious after seeing Victor directly. Then Scene beat him to a bloody pulp. Scene didn't kill him immediately because he wanted to know Leek's whereabouts. Finally, Victor told him where the girls kept. Scene quickly told Victor to show him the way to the place. When they arrived, Scene and Max walked carefully. They kept an eye out in case Victor set a trap. Scene found several guards who were ready to kill Scene and Max, but they easily killed Victor's men. Then Scene asked one of Victor's men to show him where Leek was. When Leek saw her father coming, she looked happy. Scene immediately hugged Leek. Then Max suggested that Scene and Leek go home. Meanwhile, Max will kill Victor first. Then Max cut off Victor's head and displayed it on the side of the road. In the end scene, Susan, Lauren, and Lake were back together and living in peace.